We are on global warming. Global warming. And we sure feel the heat now, don't we? But praise Yahweh. I think we'll have maybe Yahweh will bless us with a cool front coming through. Okay, here on page 104. Now, we were covering about sorceries, as you see on page 102, which leading into the fact where, as Yahweh says, it's changing his laws that causes these things. Now here on the top of the page it talks about this great city in Revelation 17:18. He says, I saw a great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. These are all key scriptures that show us where this power and authority is coming from that is actually bringing this destruction upon this earth. Okay? And a city that sits on 7 hills. So, Yahweh gives very strong evidence to his people. Okay, remember, the wicked will never understand. They'll never see these things. People have said before, well, there's other cities that are built on 7 hills too. How do you know that's Rome? There's many other cities built on 7 hills. Well, name them. They can't really name them and so forth. But even if they do find some place that has it and so forth, it doesn't matter. The scriptures are very plain to those who will believe them. And Yahweh gives us exact details. Now, the basic everyday encyclopedia on page 451 shows us the following information. It shows here the picture of Rome. You see the Tiber River there, which is for those who don't have books, we'll show it to you. Okay, let's see. This is the Tiber River flowing here, okay? And then here encircled with the 7 hills, each one of these. So if you count them, there's actually 7 of them, okay? Now, Compton's Picture Encyclopedia tells us some stuff, too. Compton's Picture Encyclopedia, 1948, volume 12, page 144, tells us about the city of 7 hills. It says, the city of 7 hills. Now remember 7, right? The number 7 means completion. It means perfection. In other words, it fulfills Yahweh's plan. Okay, so he shows us. He picked this city on purpose, and Yahweh is the one who set up the 7 hills. He's the one who allowed these things to develop. Yahweh is the creator. He's the one who created. He's the one who allowed the formation. He allowed the microbes to form these 7 hills that Rome would be built upon. Okay, so he's far above anybody that tries to come up with anything to try and discredit our creator. He's far too wise for that. So Compton says the 7 hills, the Capitoline, the Palatine, the Aventine, the Quirinal, the Verminal, the Esquiline, and the Calian hills. Also, this is the seat of the papacy, the head of the great Roman Catholic Church. Now, if you notice in here, okay, the United States is built upon Roman law. Okay, we are just an extension of the beast, right? The first beast. And then you have the second beast, which is the United States. We're just an extension of them. And so you notice these 7 hills, the Capitoline, okay? That's Capitol Hill. That's why our government is based upon this. In Washington, you have Capitol Hill, okay? Because these are where the officials, the Roman officials, had their governments set up, and they actually ruled Rome from these different areas and stuff. Now, she was brought forth by changing Yahweh's laws, and has created a world of drug addicts. Okay, and this is what he's talking about the Vatican here. In Romans 9:21 speaks about sorceries and murderers. Over 46 million babies were murdered each year through abortion. Fornication, sodomy, adultery, and bestiality are strongly warned against in many prophecies. Also in these prophecies are the harmful effects and results of sin that are sent into the earth and the atmosphere. Okay, the earth and the atmosphere. Let me read you something here, since we are on the about the atmosphere. If you go back to page 102, let's see, page 102, on the left-hand column on the very bottom, it says, depending on the sickness of the mind yielding to illegal lust, the germs created can come in any number of forms capable of entering any number of victims, affecting them in many ways. And yes, even the stratosphere. Science is yet to learn all to know about the ozone layer within the stratosphere, or what it actually does for the earth and the inhabitants other than absorbing ultraviolet radiation. Okay, now we know that we're on a great heat wave, right? Let me read you something here to make you really nice and cozy today, since it's so nice and beautiful weather today, right? The big heat wave. It says the big heat wave from Algeria to the Arctic. But what's the cause? Okay? It says, last week authorities in Sweden took an unusual step. They issued an appeal for international aid to help them tackle an epidemic of wildfires that has spread across the nation over the past 5 days. After months without rain, followed by weeks of soaring temperatures, which we have been experiencing too, right? So it's not just the United States, it's other places around the world. Now we talk about Sweden, okay? Remember, Sweden is up in the Arctic Circle. The nation's forests have become tinderboxes. The result was inevitable. Wildfires broke out, and by the end of the week, more than 50 forest blazes, a dozen inside the Arctic Circle, okay? Inside the Arctic Circle, has spread across Sweden. A nation famous for its cold and snow found itself unable to cope with the conflagrations taking place within its border, and so made its appeal for international help. It says, nor is the nation's fiery fate particularly unusual at present. Although much of the northern hemisphere, intense and prolonged heat waves have triggered disruption and devastation as North America, which is we're suffering, the Arctic, Northern Europe, and Africa have sweltered in record-breaking temperatures. Dozens have died in the withering heat, with startling and grim consequences. Montreal, this is talking about Canada, Montreal's morgue has been swamped with bodies of those who have died because of the heat, and many corpses have had to be stored elsewhere in the city. Britain's scorching weather, which has melted the roof of Glasgow's Science Centre and parched the lawns of the nation's historic homes. It's gotten that hot where it's actually melting the roofs of buildings. However, it's been relatively mild in impact compared to those experienced in many other parts of the world. One of the other factors is the jet stream, which is a core of strong winds around 5 to 7 miles above Earth's surface that blow from west to east, which steer weather around the globe. Sometimes when they are immense or intense, they bring storms. On other occasions, when they are weak, they bring very calm and settled days. And that's what's occurring at the present. And that's what you see today, because you notice today there's no breezes blowing, okay? It says the jet stream we are currently experiencing is extremely weak, and as a result, areas of atmospheric high pressure are lingering for long periods over the same place. As a result, any phenomenon such as the weakening of the jet stream is going to have more pronounced effect than it did 40 years ago. Nor is the problem of increasing severe heat waves confined to the land. We also have marine heat waves as well, all over the globe. There was a major marine heat wave that struck the coast of Australia last year and it devastated vast swaths of the Great Barrier Reef. More to the point, marine heat waves are also becoming more and more frequent and intense, like those on the land, and that is something that we should be very worried about, it says. That was from the Guardian there. So, you can see the cause of this global warming, what is the effects of it all around us. Okay, so let's continue on here. He says, continue at the top of page 104, right column. It says, the prophet said that these false prophets and the people who followed them would be like Sodom and Gomorrah. See, all of this was caused by this, remember, this lifestyle, okay, was put in them and passed on through their genes and so forth. But when it got to Sodom and Gomorrah had defiled stuff so bad that Yahweh just had to destroy it, or it would have destroyed many other places. But Yahweh has always used that as an example of what's going to take place in his last days, because just like it was destroyed by fire, so is the rest of the earth because of their lifestyle. You remember 23:14, he says, I've seen the prophets of Jerusalem in a horrible thing. They commit adultery and they walk in lies. They turn from Yahweh and fall after the gods. They have also strengthened the hands of evildoers, so that no one turns back from his wickedness. All of them are like Sodom to me, and her inhabitants are like Gomorrah. Well, the Apostle Shaul talked about this too, if you remember, in Romans chapter 1. In Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 32, he goes into big detail here, describing these things. In Romans chapter, let's start off with verse 18 here. It says, for the justice of Yahweh is revealed from heaven concerning all unholiness and unrighteousness of, and this is talking about men and women as well, but who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Now remember, deception is a choice, right? They choose to live this lifestyle. For that which is known about Yahweh is manifest to them, because Yahweh has shown it to them. So it's not like they did not know this. They were told these things. Remember, when Israel was brought out of Egypt, all of this was the law was given to them. This is why they say that, Moshe was the lawgiver. Well, this wasn't the first time the law of Yahweh was made known to mankind. That's what the Christians think, But he gave this to Israel to remind him of all of these things and the reason why he brought them out of Egypt. For since the creation of the world, the invisible things of him are clearly seen, his eternal power and holiness being understood by the things that are written, so that they are without excuse. So you notice these invisible things, okay? These are all the things that are clearly seen by the house of Yahweh in these last days. We understand the microbial world. We understand the relationship that they have with mankind and with all of Yahweh's creation, and the reason why this earth and heavens are defiled. Because of this, that when they knew Yahweh, they did not glorify him as Father, nor were they thankful, but they became, notice, they made the choice. They weren't thankful to be. This is why people leave Yahweh's houses, because they're not thankful for what Yahweh has given unto them. They're not thankful for the understanding that Yahweh has given unto them. Because when they knew Yahweh, they didn't glorify him as the Father, nor were they thankful, but they became idolaters. They became God worshippers. In their reasoning, and their senseless minds were darkened. And that's what takes place, remember? The confusion of the mind. That's what Babylon is about. That's what God worship is about. The gate of the gods. It has to do with darkening the minds. And this is the reason why it says that Satan has the whole world deceived, and that she darkens the minds, blinds the minds of the people. Because if you can't think, you can't take care of yourself. And if your mind is messed up, then your body will soon deteriorate. And this is what's killing off mankind. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. And they exchanged, notice, they exchanged the glory of the uncorruptible Father, the glory of Yahweh. And remember, Yahweh wants to share that glory with us. Okay? He wants to share that glory with us. But they exchanged that glory that was once given to them. Okay, the understanding was given to them for images made to resemble corruptible man and birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. This all has to do with bestiality and so forth. But you notice they exchanged this for the image, not to be made in the image of Yahweh, but to be made into the image of these gods. Therefore, Yahweh gave them up to uncleanness through their lust of their own minds. Notice, it's in their minds. They were the ones responsible for this. They gave themselves this mark, as it says in Revelation 13, about the mark of the beast. Through the lust of their own minds, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who exchanged the truth of Yahweh for the lie. They had the truth of Yahweh. They could have kept it, but instead they gave it up for a lie, to worship the gods and the goddesses and so forth. Okay? But that's the choice that Yahweh gives everybody. Now, for this reason, it came to pass that they gave themselves up to degrading passions. Notice, they gave themselves up. This is the reason why the curses have come upon the people, because they brought it upon themselves. Not that Yahweh is a mean old God who cursed them and caused all this to come upon them. They actually gave this to themselves, because by living this lifestyle, rather than allowing themselves to be made pure and holy in the image of Yahweh, the way that the house of Yahweh does, instead they give themselves over to the worship of these gods. And so the gods only want to do one thing, and that is to destroy mankind. So naturally they take on all of these things, all these diseases and so forth, and the degrading passions in their minds, because their minds become corrupted, their minds become darkened, and they serve the gods and the goddesses. In verse 27, and the men did the same thing, leaving the natural use of the women, burning in their lust for one another, men committing shameful acts with men, and suffering in their own bodies the penalty of their error, which is their fitting reward. It's not Yahweh doing that, it's themselves. They're bringing these curses upon themselves, because when you sin, you begin dying. And if you cause, these types of sins are against the body. All sin is a sin against, it takes your mind to do it. But remember, these types of sins take your body and your mind, okay? So your mind becomes affected and your body becomes affected. Now, when your body becomes affected or infected, you take on these diseases which come from these microbes which have been mutated. But all of this stuff is passed on. Now, today we are living with 6,000 years. 6,000 years of sin, of curses. Now, there have been countless numbers of people who have committed adultery, who have committed fornication, who have committed bestiality and homosexuality and all of these things that have caused us all these curses, and they passed them on from generation to generation to generation. Now, many, homosexuals have been committing these sins and so forth, but they would hide it, It used to be called when they would come out of the closet, Now they openly admit who they are and so forth, But the thing is, the majority of these people were married. And they hid it behind marriage, and even had families with children, but still they were homosexuals. Now just think, all of those sins that they committed secretly, went into the genetic makeup of their children. Now the children knew nothing about this, and then later on they'll find out about it, that dad is a certain way and so forth, after they divorce and all this kind of stuff, But these children are cursed because of the fact that now they're carrying the sins of the fathers. And this has been going on for 6,000 years. So you can see how it's built up into society the way it is today. And this is the reason why, everybody born on earth, anyone born living on this earth today, is carrying these STDs in their bodies. And so are we. But it's the keeping of Yahweh's laws that are keeping these things down under control. And so man did the same thing, leaving the natural use of the woman. They burned in their lust for one another, men committing shameful acts with men, and suffering in their bodies the penalty for their error. So, since they did not like to retain Yahweh in their knowledge, they didn't want to keep the image of Yahweh, it came to pass that they were given over to deadly diseases that damaged their brains. Notice, it damaged their brains. And it robbed them of righteous judgment, thus doing those things which are perverted. Because when their brains are damaged, they can't think straight. And if they can't think straight, then they're not going to make righteous decisions. And if they don't make the righteous decisions, then they're going to be living with the curses and spreading those curses. And that's exactly what has taken place. And that's the reason why you make yourself into the image of the gods when you live that particular lifestyle. Causing them to arise all unrighteousness, sexual impurity, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, total envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. And they even practice sorcery and witchcraft to protect themselves from the deadly plagues. But it doesn't help. Remember, we just covered sorcery just a little bit ago. They were backbiters and slanderers. They were haters of Yahweh. They were despiteful. They were arrogant and boastful. Inventors of evil things, notice. Disobedient to parents. This is why people love war. This is why they can think of these things. This is why you can have these scientists think about the destructive weapons that they have made. And they're designing all kinds of stuff right now that we don't even, the public's not even aware of. But there's all sorts of governmental agencies that's out there that are developing all sorts of different weapons and stuff, and they're trying to perfect them and so forth. But to think that they're trying to think of a better way to kill someone, that's their mindset. That's what war is about. And so they love to go to war because they want to test out their new weapons. It gives them great joy when they do that. When it reminds me of what the gods did, when they were here on earth with the dinosaurs. They used the dinosaurs as weapons of war. This was their games. Their warlike mentality was they made these dinosaurs to go and to fight one another and kill one another and shred one another up and spread the blood and guts and everything all over the place, And this gave them great joy and thrill. And that's how eventually Yahweh wiped out the earth. But it says they're without understanding, notice. They're covenant breakers. They break the law of Yahweh all the time. And they break their own covenants. They don't keep their contracts. They're without natural affection. This is the reason why you have the perverts in the world today. They're implacable, they're truth breakers, and they're unmerciful. That's one of the things that Yeshua said, go and learn what mercy is, Who, knowing the righteous judgment of Yahweh, and those who practice such things deserve death, not only do they continue to do those very things, but they also approve of those who practice them. And that's what the scripture says, right? That's what the prophet said. It said the days would come when the people would think if you perform righteousness, you're mad. And they will look upon righteousness as being evil. And evil as being something that's righteous. And that's exactly the way it is. And it all started off very subtle, right? It started off very subtle with even little sayings that people would say. Ooh, man, that's bad. Well, if it's bad, why do you want it? No, it's not. I don't mean bad is bad, but it's bad. Well, what's bad supposed to be? Well, bad means good, It's like, well, if you're worshiping a God, why don't you just say so, But won't you give honor and glory to Yahweh and be thankful for the things that you have, But it's these little subtle ways that the gods work on the minds of the people and build it up in layers, layer upon layer upon layer. Because that's the way that Yahweh works. Satan's very subtle. She knows the way that Yahweh works to build up a person's mind to get them to a certain point to where they can accept the truth and continue in the truth. And she worked with the world in the same way, and that's why she has the whole world deceived. Very powerful being. That's why Yahweh chose her. He knew that she would do the job. These verses are referring to sexual sin, sodomy, fornication, adultery, homosexuality, bestiality, and of course, pedophilia. Now, according to the written words of the late Malachi Martin, he was a top writer of the Catholic Church. He was a Jesuit priest, and he was a writer. He says this in his book, In the Keys of the Blood, page 632. He says it was what knowledgeable churchmen called the superforce. Rumors always difficult to verify tied its installation to the beginning of Pope Paul's sixth reign in 1963. Indeed, Pope Paul, he's talking about, had alluded to somberly to the, quote, the smoke of Satan which has entered the sanctuary. The smoke of Satan which has entered the sanctuary, which was an oblique reference to an enthronement ceremony by Satanists in the Vatican. Besides the incidents of satanic pedophilia, rites and practices was already documented among certain bishops and priests as widely dispersed as Turin in Italy and South Carolina in the United States. The cultic acts of satanic pedophilia are considered by professionals to be the culmination of the fallen archangel's rites. And of course, we know, the fallen archangel, of course, is Satan herself. So he knew of this, and this reference was presented to show what's going on in the Vatican. It puts it very obvious, anybody who's ever kept up on the news of these things. So please understand, the sins of the Catholic Church are many, but all sins, no matter what they are, add to the harmful effects that bring harm to all the things with which the earth creeps. Notice, the sins of the Catholic Church are many, but no matter what it is, they all bring harmful effects to all things with which the earth creeps. Now remember, this was shown in the very beginning. In Genesis 2 verse 17, remember Yahweh says, dying you shall die. In other words, when you sin, Adam and Eve, you began the death process within your body. Because now you began your body, which was made perfect to begin with. It was healthy. But now you began the dying process in it because you have sinned. Okay, and if you remember what it says in Genesis, very familiar verse, but let's look at it anyway. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 24, okay, then Yahweh said, let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind. Okay, the cattle and the creeping thing, notice, the microbes, and the beast of the earth, each according to its kind, and it was so. And Yahweh made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And Yahweh saw that it was right. Then Yahweh saw that it was right, right? Then Yahweh said, I will make man in my image according to my likeness, and they will have rulership over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. Okay? So if you notice, verse 24 and 25 there, he made these things beforehand. Okay? And then he made man to have rulership over them, to take care of them. Okay? And he taught Adam. And the very first day of Adam's life, remember the Sabbath day was the very next day, and Yahweh taught Adam how to take care of the earth, how to take care of the air, how to take care of the water, how to take care of the animals, everything, because his life depended upon all of these things. Now, he was to rule over these things. And that word rulership, it means to guard and to protect and to become a teacher and so forth, okay? In the 11th book of Israel, Report 2, chapter 22, verse 47, he says, the rulership is shown here is to be one of lesser things that comes when you take away the strength of Yahweh, which is not rulership. It's leadership. It's love. It's kindness. It's mercy. It's teaching. It's being a slave to others, okay? So mankind was created to be servants just like Yahweh is a servant to mankind, to all creation. So the pattern of the kingdom on earth, you remember Solomon, they experienced that in Solomon's kingdom. Remember it says even every servant enjoyed life and they enjoyed serving. So it showed you that this same great joy comes in serving others and even in serving the microbes, and also in the microbes serving us, because they do serve us to keep us alive, you know. So they keep Yahweh's laws in that manner, in that fashion, so that we can be alive and survive. So, getting back here, it says, no matter what they they add to the harmful effects which bring harm to all the things with which the earth creeps. Now, oddly enough, one of the reasons mankind was created was to guard against the defilement of the earth and our food supply. And this information, of course, is found in the Hebrew words in the book of Genesis. But it's become pretty obscure in English translations. But back to sin and defilement. Now, the prophet Isaiah was inspired to write that changing Yahweh's laws is a cause that the earth was defiled. Remember Isaiah 24, 1 through 6, he says, Yahweh's eyes see what takes place. The earth becomes empty, made waste. The face is perverted. It becomes the inhabitants have perverted these things. And so will it be with the priests and the people, all society. The land would be utterly emptied and utterly plundered, for it would come to pass that this judgment has been pronounced. The earth mourns and fades away, and the earth also is defiled because of the inhabitants of it, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, and broken the everlasting covenant. Because of this, the curse has devoured the earth. Okay, so Yahweh is very plain in why these things have taken place. Now, the wicked don't understand that, and they question, it's like, well, if there is a great loving God, then why does all this stuff take place on earth? Well, because of exactly what he says just here. Yahweh gives us the reason why. Because they break his laws. Mankind has brought this upon himself, not Yahweh. Now, in Isaiah 24, verse 4, notice it says, the earth mourns and fades away, and the world mourns and fades away. And the heart of people of the earth languish. The word translated earth means earth, but it also means everything on and in the earth. Okay, everything that's on the earth and everything that's in the earth. In the King James Version, in Genesis, it says the phrase, everything that creeps upon the earth is written. But in the Hebrew, it means all things with which the earth creeps. So this takes into account what science calls the microorganisms, the microscopic animals, the plants, the bacteria, the viruses, and so forth. So in each one of these, they have a specific purpose. Yahweh made them for a reason, to be able to keep mankind alive. In fact, it says, in fact, each handful of earth is teeming with thousands of kingdoms of microorganisms. And these kingdoms are what keeps the earth alive and actively producing our food supply. They work together to clean and to turn everything that dies into reusable substances for fruits, for grains and vegetables, for man and for his animals, and even the fish and the birds. Okay, even the fish and the birds. All of these things. Now, if all the microorganisms were to die, then food production, of course, would stop. And that would mean that famines would come, and man would eventually die. Okay? He'd die from starvation, because these microorganisms, they can be killed out of the earth in many different ways. And he says, I ask you to please consider what Yahweh now says, because the earth is getting in pretty bad shape. In Isaiah 24, verse 4, he says, the earth mourns and fades away. The world mourns and fades away. And the heart of people of the earth languish. Now this word fade, it means to fall or fail, to come to naught, okay, just to come to nothing, okay. It means to deteriorate, which you can see this means sickness, okay. It's something that is tearing it apart and dying. It means to make vile, okay, just like Yahweh talks about the abominations, something that is vile and disgusting, okay. It means to deprave, it means sick. So you can see Yahweh promised to mankind that through his sins is what's defiling and making sick and causing to fall and fail all the creeping things with which the earth creeps. These are all the kingdoms, the microorganisms. In the earth, in the atmosphere, in the water, and so forth. All these things are being destroyed. Okay? In the atmosphere, let me read you something here. Trillions upon trillions. Let me do it this way. Trillions upon trillions. I'll make it. Trillions upon trillions of viruses fall from the sky each day. It says, high in the Sierra Nevada mountains of Spain, an international team of researchers set out 4 buckets to gather a shower of viruses falling from the sky. Scientists were surprised, or they surmised that they were surprised, but they have surmised that there's a stream of viruses circling the planet, above the planet's weather systems, but below the level of airline travel. Very little is known about this realm, and that's why the number of deposited viruses stunned the team in Spain. Each day, they calculated, some 800 million viruses cascade into every square meter of the planet. Now, think of this. A square meter, okay? A meter is a little bit larger than a yard, okay? A yard is, 36 inches? A meter is approximately 39 inches. Think of a box, half the size of this podium, whatever. A 3 feet cube. Within that cube, you would have some 800 million viruses. How many of those cubes you think would fill up this part of the sanctuary that you're sitting in? Think of the amount of viruses that would be contained in just one little small area. And now multiply that upon the entire planet of Earth. And you can see how magnificent Yahweh is. Okay, so he says here, unimpeded by the friction with the surface of the earth, you can travel great distances, so international travel is quite easy for viruses, okay? A marine biologist says. Generally, it's assumed that these viruses originated on the planet and were swept upward. But some researchers theorize that viruses actually may originate in the atmosphere. Whatever the case, viruses are the most abundant entities on the planet by far. And they found hundreds of millions of viruses in a square meter, while they found only tens of millions of bacteria in the same space. So there's tens of millions of bacteria in that same space, while there's hundreds of millions of viruses in that same space. And remember, they all share the same space because the virus will invade the bacteria and stuff too. Mostly thought of as infectious agents, viruses are more than that. It's hard to overstate the central role that viruses play in the world. They're essential to everything, from our immune system to our gut microbe, to the ecosystems on land and sea, notice, to climate regulation of all species. Viruses contain a vast diverse array of unknown genes and spread them to other species. Last year, 3 experts called for a new initiative to better understand viral ecology, especially as the planet changes. Viruses modulate the function and evolution or the growth of all living things. The virus injects its own DNA into the host. Sometimes that new genes are useful to the host and it becomes a part of the genome. Much research now is aimed at the factoring of the process into understanding of how the planet works. If you could weigh all the living material in the oceans, 95% of it's stuff you can't see. You can't see this stuff. 95% of it you can't see. But they're responsible for supplying half the oxygen on the planet. And then it goes on and it gives you an example there of a grass that's found in Yellowstone and the geothermal areas where it actually needs a fungus to survive an extreme environment, and in turn that fungus needs a virus in order to survive. And so you can see how they help one another out. So he says at the very bottom, it says, viruses aren't our enemies. Certain nasty viruses can make you sick. But it's important to recognize that viruses and other microbes out there are absolutely integral for the ecosystem. Okay, and that involves the whole earth. So that means that, you have to have these viruses out there. This is the reason why Yahweh made these things. Okay? Now, let's continue on here. He says, these are sick, okay? So they become sick, they fail, it causes the creeping things to become sick. The earth is defiled, Isaiah 24:5, the earth is defiled because of the inhabitants of it. And the Hebrew word for defile means to corrupt, containing alterations, errors, desecrate, to violate the sacredness of, to make unclean or impure or poison. Go back to Genesis, okay? You always go back to the law. You always go back to the very beginning. We just read in the very beginning, remember in Genesis chapter 1, where Yahweh says he made all of these things and he saw that it was right. It was righteous. It was pure. It was consecrated. It was all of these things that he said that was right to cause man to be able to live and survive on earth. But now the earth is defiled. Now it's corrupt. Now mankind has violated the sacredness of the earth. Mankind has made it unclean and impure and has actually brought poison to the earth. So in return, he's destroying himself. He's causing his own destruction. And this is what Yahweh is trying to point out to everybody. The earth is also defiled at this time, and that science is scrambling to find drugs for animals, birds, and fish, just as they are for people to prolong their lives. But the bugs are getting more resistance to the drugs And the earth, the people, the animals, the birds, and the fish are getting less resistance. Okay? They're getting less resistance. You know, even the seas are getting less resistant. You know, these things are taking place. Here's some info that says, ocean wilderness disappearing globally. Scientists have mapped marine wilderness areas around the world for the first time. These are regions minimally impacted by human activities such as fishing, pollution, and shipping, and the diseases of mankind that they're spreading throughout the waters and so forth. The team led by researchers in Australia found that just 13.2% of the world's oceans could be classed as wilderness. And these are mostly in international waters away from human populations. 13.2%. Now remember, though, 70% of the world, of the earth, is covered with water. Very few coastal areas meet the criteria, including coral reefs, because we already seen how they're being destroyed by mankind. We read a lot about that. How much is left? You say, well, the team found that most of the areas defined as wilderness fell within the Arctic, Antarctic, and around Pacific Island nations or in open oceans where human activity is more limited. In other words, you got to get away from mankind in order to find something that's not so much defiled. Despite their conservation status, now you know they're always trying conservation, right? They're always trying to conserve nature. Well, despite their conservation status, marine protected areas appear to host just 4.9% of the global marine wilderness. It was noted that wilderness areas exposed by the decline of sea ice in the Arctic are now potentially vulnerable to anthropogenic impacts. In other words, because the ice is melting, man is traveling and traversing those waters, and they're going to end up spreading all kinds of stuff. You got to remember, when a ship goes through the water, okay, a ship carries water, drinking water. I mean, if it has a purification system on it to take the ocean's water and purify it and so forth. But what do they do with the waste? They dump it into the ocean, okay? So it's nothing different that's occurring out there in the oceans that's occurring here on land, okay? Just like the waste is going through these septic systems and going out to these treatment plants in the cities and so forth, you know, and getting spread in the drinking water and so forth. The waste on these ships are going into the ocean. Now, if these sailors have all sorts of diseases that they're carrying within their bodies, and this is just being flushed out and is going into the oceans. So is it any wonder why these things are being destroyed? Well, since the ice is melting in the Arctic, now it's becoming more free to go through that area. There's going to be more and more travel throughout that different area. Okay, let's read here on page 106. He says, will genetically engineered crop mean adulterated and toxic food, bodies, and ecosystems? Without any scientifically or empirically verified evidence, advocates of agricultural biotechnology claim that genetically engineered GE or GE modified crops are the answer to world hunger and will give security to an ever increasing population. They claim that by making conventional production agriculture efficient, biodiversity can be protected and endangered species saved. Well, guess what? They've already tried this stuff. In African countries who are starving refuse to take the food because they know it's GM. They know it's already been genetically modified and they don't want anything to do with it. They have enough sense to know that, you know. But that's man's way, thinking that they can solve it, and it's really only a way for making more money is what they want to do. There's increasing scientific evidence to the contrary, which is why Great Britain is leading the European Economic Community to put agricultural biotechnology on hold until more is known about the risk and the benefits of GE crops, foods, additives, supplements, enzymes, and vitamins, and so forth, to be more carefully monitored and effectively regulate agrobiotechnology and to apply the precautionary principle to this new technology. So that some of them have enough sense to know, and they're fighting against it. But still, Europe is really strange, okay? Because they do not like GM, genetically modified foods. They fight against it. They have rules and regulations and laws and so forth for protection and so forth. But at the same time, foods that you see here and something that you would pick up, a cucumber, for instance, that you'd pick up and you look at it, and maybe it has a little yellow on it, and it's got a little curve to it, maybe, and it's a little bit wider on one end than the other end. You slice that thing open, and it's nice and juicy and delicious, right? It's great. You wouldn't throw it away, right? Why would you throw it away? It's perfectly fine. They grow with different variable things and so forth. Not so in Europe. Europe has their food standards to where cucumbers have to be a certain length, a certain diameter, perfectly straight, and all look exactly the same. If not, they throw them out. They will not sell them in the store. Potatoes, tons and tons and tons of potatoes are thrown away all the time because they're not the proper shape and size and looks. There's so much waste of food that they throw away. But everything in the European markets have to be according to those guidelines. Now you can see how subtle Satan was when she enforced that to make that take place so that all this food would be wasted. Farmers who have potatoes have truckloads and truckloads of potatoes, and they can just throw away dump loads of potatoes away because they can't sell them on the market. There's nothing they can do, So, although there are certain things that guide specific things, there are other crazy laws, and it just shows the mentality of mankind, So you would never see some of the foods that we eat here on the market in Europe. They have to be very pleasing to the eye and so forth. Well, at the 12th, this was in 1999, the 12th Annual Scientific Conference of the International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements, more than 600 delegates from 60 countries voted unanimously for a declaration against the use of genetically modified organisms in food production and agriculture. The delegates called on the governments and regulatory agencies throughout the world to immediately ban genetic engineering in agriculture and food production since it involves these things. It involves negative and irreversible environmental impacts. They don't know. You see, and that's the thing, because studies haven't been done, so they can't tell you what all that has taken place. But we definitely know it's negative and it's irreversible. You can't change it once it's put into effect. The release of organisms of an unrecallable nature. If they've experimented with something, which they always do with drugs, ask your doctor if this is right for you. Might kill you, but ask if it's all right, because you might have an enjoyable night one night, then you'll be dead the next day. But the drug will give you that good time, right? That's the mentality of these people. It's the same thing with this. This release of these organisms, their unrecallable nature. Once they're released, they don't know. They don't know what these genes are going to do once they release them into the atmosphere. And they're going to be released through the pollen and so forth that these plants will put off. Also, the removal of the right of choice, both for farmers and consumers. Okay? It removes that. The farmers can no longer plant a crop and then save the seed and replant those seeds. They have to buy new seed every year. And the plants that produce seeds are not usable. The seeds are not usable anyway. But now they've got it to where they have to buy. And this is why farmers are going out of business and so forth. Well, if the farmers go out of business, then what are they going to eat? What is the world going to eat? They're so crazy. So no longer do the farmers have a choice, no longer do consumers have a choice. It's also a violation of farmers' fundamental property rights and the endangerment of their economic independence. Practices which are incompatible with the principles of sustainable agriculture as defined by IFOAM and also unacceptable threats to human health. Okay, so that's the bottom line of the reason why they voted against these things. Now it says to regard many genetically engineered GE crops and food as being adulterated and even potentially toxic, and therefore posing potential risks to human and other consumers, including insects, birds, and wild and domesticated mammals, and to the environment, is not unreasonable considering the following scientifically documented findings. Okay? So they're saying, look, when you look at the overall picture and you see the harm and the danger that can come to man and to beasts and to the wildlife, the birds and so forth, it doesn't make sense to do it, because there is evidence that foreign DNA can enter the body via the gastrointestinal tract across the placenta. Okay, so DNA from this genetically modified food can enter into the body through the gut and enter into a baby. Okay? Genetically modified organisms can produce unanticipated toxins or allergens. People can be born now with having an allergy that could kill them. And it could come because the parents ate GMO. Gene transfer can occur between transgenic plants and bacteria, the ecological consequences of which can be catastrophic. Milk from cows injected with RBG, which is not analogous to normal BGH, it's RBGH, which is not analogous to normal BGH, has elevated insulin-like growth factor that is implicated as a risk factor in human breast cancer. So they've noticed that, even drinking milk, and they look how they advertise milk on the market, they really play it big. Number 5, considering the documented evidence that horizontal gene transfer between species is a natural phenomenon, the precautionary principle must be applied in creating transgenic organisms that could transfer novel genes and viral vectors to other species. The ecological, voluntary, and public health consequences of such transfers we only know after the fact. In other words, you don't know the dangers that's there. Horizontal gene transfer is even more likely to take place in the digestive systems of protozoa, nematodes, insect larvae, and other soil macroorganisms. Now, these are beings that live in the soil, that keeps the soil healthy, okay? And if they're affected, then the soil itself is going to be affected. Horizontal gene transfer. Now, there's two types of gene transfer, okay? There's vertical and there's horizontal. Horizontal or lateral gene transfer occurs when the genetic information is passed sideways, okay, horizontal, to relatively unrelated organisms as opposed to a direct descendant. Transmission of genetic information from parent to offspring is termed vertical gene transfer, okay? It's natural. Lateral movement or movement of genetic information from a donor to an unrelated recipient is called horizontal gene transfer. Horizontal gene transfer is also known as lateral gene transfer, refers to non-sexual transmission of genetic material between unrelated genomes. Hence, horizontal gene transfers involves gene transfer across species boundaries. Okay? This is how this mutation stuff starts taking place between different species. Horizontal gene transfer, or HGT, is the transfer of genetic material directly from the genome of an organism to that of another, rather than between parent and offspring. HGT between distantly related bacteria is a commonplace process that allows them to quickly share adaptive genes. That is, an antibiotic-resistant set of genes to adapt to an antibiotic. It also contributes significantly to the emergence of newly bacterial pathogens or poisons, toxins, and so forth. But if you notice here, okay, the bacteria, they adapt. They become resistant. Well, that's what you see today. This is why, the antibiotics and so forth don't work, because they become resistant. This gene transfer is taking place from one to another and is mutated to the form to where it could no longer be effective in treating these diseases. But you know, the genes, like it says, well, look at verse 6, it says, that genes like viruses can infect should serve as a warning to us all of the potential risks of transgenic organisms serving as reservoirs for new diseases and as a medium for the evolution of new pathogens because of their altered physiological and biochemistry. So it's saying, you know, we should be paying attention and realizing that when you alter something that Yahweh has made to be a certain way, when Yahweh made them in the very beginning in Genesis, it says he made all these things and they were right. Okay? None of these deadly viruses that are deadly now were made that way in the beginning. But through the sin of man, they have mutated to where now they become deadly to mankind. And you know, Yahweh showed that in his 10 commandments. You remember in Exodus 20 verse 5, he says, you should not bow down to them nor serve them, for I am Yahweh. I am your heavenly Father who is zealous for my house. And it says the sexual sins of the fathers will be on the children to the 3rd and the 4th generations, right? Of those who transgress against my laws, to the 3rd and 4th generations. Now, it says the sexual sins of the fathers will be on the 3rd and 4th, children of the 3rd and 4th generations of those who transgress my laws. The King James says something a little bit different. It says, this. It says, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children. Okay? Now that word visiting, according to Brown, Drive, and Briggs, it means to muster. Okay? To call up. You remember when the scripture says that there were new gods would come up, Yahweh says in Deuteronomy. The word visiting, it means to be called to account. Okay? In other words, there's a reason for something. You're calling something into account. And you remember Yahweh said in his law about the blood. He says every time somebody kills and slaughters an animal and so forth, there was going on record. And that blood that is being spilt on the ground through the slaughter of that animal mankind is being accountable for that. So getting back here, he says, to be deposited, this word visiting, he will visit the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, notice. That means to be deposited. Well, it's being deposited into their genetics, right? Their genetic makeup. It also means numbered. Well, it also says that it would increase and become resistant and so forth as these new gods come up. But notice it visits the iniquity of the fathers upon the children. And the word iniquity, it means perversity. It means depravity. It means guilt or punishment of iniquity, or the consequence of or for iniquity. So the consequences, okay, notice the consequences are of or for the perverseness of mankind. It's not a punishment from Yahweh. It's a warning from Yahweh. And he warns mankind. He says, your iniquity, the results of your iniquity are going to be brought out upon your offspring. And your offspring is going to suffer for this very reason. It's because of your sins. And you notice that word upon. It says visiting upon the children. That means to be on account of or because of. Okay, so on account of or because of your iniquity, your perverseness, you will bring the ultimate consequence will be that your children and your children's children will suffer. And that's why we suffer today, because we have 6,000 years of all this stuff piled up on top of us. You know, that was known in the days of Yeshua. You remember when Yeshua was preaching and his disciples, and he came across a man who was born blind, right? It says the man was born blind. From birth, he was born blind. And they asked him, who sinned? Was it his father or his mother? Who caused his sin of blindness? Okay? Why is this man born blind? And Yeshua said, neither. But that Yahweh's name would be glorified. And so the reason why in this particular case was so that Yeshua could heal this man. Okay? But they understood and they realized the causes of sin and how sin would bring forth these certain curses upon mankind. So it's nothing that mankind didn't know about for thousands of years. Those who studied the scriptures knew these things, and they knew the ultimate result would be actually death would come forth from these things because of mankind's ignorance. We've got to stop here.